What's up, monsters? It's your boy David. So after last week's video, my Doom Demon here, I posted that a couple different places around the interwebs. Got some pretty good feedback. But the first comment that I got anywhere was, "That's cool. Somebody should make a Doot Demon." So that was my weekend. So this build was a little bit different than a lot of other ones that I've done. For starters, there was almost no pre-planning. I was inspired by this comment, decided that I was going to try to do the Doot Demon, and grabbed a bunch of whatever I had on hand to see how I could make it work. Partially as a result of that, I ended up making a couple of errors along the way. Rather than editing down and showing you the appropriate way to make this miniature, I'm going to show you the journey that I went through and how I wasted hours and hours on his damn horns. But, all that said, he did turn out pretty good, and I'm very happy with the way he looks, especially given the limitations that I was working with. So, let's get to it. So the foundation of this build was these plastic skeletons that I got in bulk a while ago. So I decided to use this swordsman skeleton as a base. I really liked the base pose he's got. His arms were already kind of spread out and his legs were in a position that I thought could be pretty dynamic. Didn't have a good option for hands and a head on him as much as on some of the others. So you can see that I picked out another one that has an open screaming mouth, and that I ended up using as the base for the head. So I spent the first 2 hours or so after this build was suggested just going through all the various parts that I've got on hand. So I just kind of compiled together everything that I thought might work, stuck it on the table, sorted through, and pared down to what I was going to start trying to work with. This wound up being a lot of different types of barbecue sticks and similar things, as well as different types and sizes of wire that I was going to try out. I also pulled out a few things that I thought might work well for the horns. I had the tips of mechanical pencils, the caps for dollar store super glue that had already been used up, as well as these cooking spritz bottles that are normally used for condiments or oil. I also had a couple of other pieces on hand. I grabbed a dollar store Aquaman that I picked up because I figured I could use his hands. They're a bit more detailed than the ones on the skeleton. I also decided to take the top off of this truck. I was going to use that as a kind of mechanical piece for the back plate of the armor. So here I've pared down to what I was going to be doing with my first run, and I'm starting to try to test fit things together and see how they're going to work. My first attempt at the trumpet was going to be the front of a mechanical pencil, a brass tack flipped wrong side round, stuck on front of it, and then a dollar store Q-tip rod, because they're actually hollow plastic, sticking those together to make the little horn. So my first attempt at the curly bits on the trumpet, I decided I was going to take paper clips because they already have the approximate shape I was going for. And I had the clever idea of taking this green floral wire, pulling the wiring out of the center, and then running the green rubber around it onto the paper clips. So I tried running the rubber casing from the floral wire onto the paper clips. This didn't work very well. I really didn't want to have to bend the shapes by hand though, so I doubled down on the paper clip idea. And by double down, what I actually mean is attempting to lube up the paper clip to shove it into the rubber casing. Which sounds stupid in retrospect, but it worked better than just doing the bare paperclip. Didn't work though. Again, this build was not planned. It was not made with optimal materials. Just trying to spitball and do the best with what I had on hand. You can start to see that with stuff like this. So after finally giving up on the lubed paperclip idea, I decided I was just going to use the floral wire because it was approximately the size I was going for, and bend it by hand into the shapes that I wanted. I was able to get the basic shapes down okay, but to get them sized to one another, there was a lot of back and forth. Bending, rebending, rebending. Eventually, I got them sized to close enough to one another that I was able to move forward. Next thing was adding some of the kind of steampunky elements to the trumpets. So I took a couple pieces of a barbecue skewer, glued those together, and that was going to be one of the base parts that was going to get mounted to the backpack. So at this point, I started working on the first iteration of the trumpet horns. Brass tack in the front, part of a mechanical pencil right behind that, and behind that the pipe section from a dollar store Q-tip. So I trimmed those down, and then I moved on to attempting to drill through the brass tacks. I tried using a pin vise with a drill bit, doing it by hand. No success. I tried using a hole punch. Again, as you can imagine, no success. Finally, I busted out the best option that I had on hand to try to get through it, which was a Dremel. Apparently I don't have any good metal cutting bits in my Dremel kit, so I was able to get through a couple of them with this, but the amount of time it took to just drill the hole in, let alone do anything to try to widen the hole for the front, it just didn't seem like it was going to be practical. And at that point, I realized I had something that was the shape I wanted, almost exactly, on hand, that I had just not thought of. And here, you can see the dollar store knockoff Legos that I used that were already the right base shape. So, don't worry, just because this seemed like a good option and very close to what I wanted for the basic shape, that doesn't mean I didn't screw it up. So at this point, I took a break from the horns and started working on the body of the Revenant. Snipped a couple of the joints, glued the pieces back together, reposing them how I wanted. Then I started gluing the parts into place and used baking soda over the joints to thicken it out and help it set faster. Editor's note: I also did the superglue and baking soda trick to texture the Revenant. I was just so excited about what a bang-up job I'd done on the horns that I forgot to mention that in the voiceover. Also at this point, Aquaman decided to lend a hand, or two, as it were. So to get that nice flare out on the front of the trumpet, I didn't have the appropriate Lego pieces on hand, but I did have some dollar store darts from a little Nerf knockoff dart gun. So I cut the suction cups off of the front, put those on the trumpet piece that I already had, and then proceeded to make my life way more difficult than it needed to be. Here's how. Rather than just doing a little bit of super glue and baking soda to smooth out the edges, I decided that I wanted to get that really nice flared out trumpet shape. So I added on a lot of layers of super glue and baking soda. So after the super glue and baking soda on the horns, I did what I've done on previous builds, and I tried to file it down to shape. So I'm working on a Doot Demon for Doom, and I'm making horns for him. Super glue and baking soda, FYI, basically concrete. Had to resort to power tools. So a not insignificant amount of grinding with the Dremel later, I actually finally got the shape I wanted, but that took about another 2-3 hours past what I should have done, which would have been even faster if I had had something like, for example, a golf tee on hand. Now to start work on the armor for the Revenant, I coiled up some different sizes of wire to try to make his front armor piece. I cut the rings to size, glued them together in a stack, and then added one of the brass tacks for the armor plate on the front. With the flared horn part of the trumpets done as much as I decided they were going to be, I started working on some of the other pieces. So for the little finger things, I'm a guitar player, obviously not a trumpet player, I took some of the Q-tip piping and added in small pieces of toothpick. After trimming those to size, I took even smaller pieces of Q-tip piping and put those on the very top. Since the trumpets were looking a little bit plain at this point, I decided to ratchet up the steampunk a little bit. So I did these wire coils around a barbecue stick, cut them to size, and slipped them on the back of the horns. The next thing after that was to put a little dome sticker button on the back to smooth out the back. They do look awfully hodgepodge, but again, it's kind of the theme for this build. Next, I started working on the armor for the Revenant. His shoulder pads were the end pieces of some plastic silverware. And for the base piece going around his rib cage and over his shoulders, I just cut some cardstock to size and wrapped that around. Most of that was going to get covered by the rest of the armor. So the base was a fairly simple design. It was just a couple layers of 1mm styrene, just kind of broken off roughly into the right shape to get his leg elevated and help him stand properly. After that, I did black magic base coat on everything. I started working on some extra details for the base. The flocking on this guy, something that I do on most of my miniatures, is dried out coffee grounds. This is another great way to upcycle some stuff that you might have laying around the house. One thing I tried on the base is I took some super glue and baking soda and I put it on this textured foil. I then took that and I broke it into a couple of smaller pieces and used that as scrap metal on his base. I also did the barbed wire on his base. The way I did that is I took a standard pipe cleaner, melted all the fuzz off of it with a lighter, coiled it around a marker, cut it to size, and put a couple toothpicks as a little cross joint for it to be mounted to. I didn't do anything particularly fancy on the paint job on this guy. I just did some base coats, some highlights, some inking, and after that just went back and forth, adding shadows and adding highlights until I got an effect that I liked. So this dude was an interesting ride. I had not planned on making him at all. It was just a very spur of the moment, off the cuff thing based on somebody's comment. I'm glad I did. I learned the limitations of some of the techniques I've been using, specifically the baking soda and super glue. That said, I think he really serves as an example of what you can do with limited resources and just a lot of creativity and a bit of extra elbow grease. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope that this helps inspire you to get out and craft more, even if you don't really have on hand what you think you need. I hope everybody stays safe, sane, and crafty, and I'll see you in the next video.